Hi, Ranjay. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lauren. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me here.
So, tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do. I know it's probably a longer story, but if you can
Mhm.
say it somewhat briefly.
Sure. I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School where I teach an elective course on business turnarounds and transformations. I've been a professor for, more than 30 years. I've did my PhD at Harvard, and I love what I do. Thank you.
We were talking earlier. I would love for you to share the story. I had mentioned that a lot of the people who are listening are professional women working within organizations, and you had a really good story about courage and professional women. So maybe you could, before we get into the deeper, like practical parts of fear and courage, maybe you could open up with the story of how that kind of first came about for you.
Sure. So, growing up as a kid, my mother, who was a primary school teacher turned anthropologist turned fashion designer, started a
Wow.
fashion business, and she went to Paris with two suitcases and convinced three fashion houses to buy her designs. And this thing took off. And, in growing up in India, this was breaking a lot of gender stereotypes of women working, but also women running a business. Anyway, this thing is, and she's traveling overseas, which was very rare in the late 60s, early 70s. Anyway, her business is doing very well. She buys a piece of land outside Delhi to build a farmhouse where she's going to spend her weekends. And it becomes very valuable. A real estate developer really wants it. So one day I'm home, I'm a teenager, and some person comes to see her and insists to 5 minutes with her, and she's trying to say no. But anyway, he's the real estate developer. He comes, sits down. She says he puts down a blank check and a piece of paper and says, "Ma'am, I just want to put an amount and I'll buy your land." And she's like, "I don't want to sell it. There's no more land, and this is a great land. I don't want to sell it. No, I don't want money. I don't care about money. Here, back." He's like, "I can't leave till you sign it." So he now gets a little more belligerent. And she's used to being trying to put people trying to push her around. She's like, "I'm not gonna sign it." So he's wearing a blazer and he pulls his blazer back and he's got a gun tucked in his waist.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm standing at the door. I'm thinking, what should I do? Should I? What am I gonna do? Should I wait for him? Can I jump him? Should I call the guard who's outside at the gate? What am I gonna do? My mother, without hesitation, stands up, walks up to him, and slaps him, whack across the face. He doesn't even see it coming. And she says, "How dare you come to my house, try to force me to sell my land, and then you show me a gun? Get out of here." He didn't even know what hit him. He just like ran out of there, forgot his checkbook. I mean, I had to run after him to give his checkbook back to him. And I asked her afterwards, I said, "Mom, that was crazy. Didn't you see he had a gun?" She says, "Yes." I said, "Weren't you scared that he could shoot us?" She's like, "Yeah, I was scared. But just because you're scared doesn't mean you do nothing. Are you going to let people bully you just because they scare you?" She says, "You gotta face your fear. It's okay." She says, "I was scared, but that doesn't mean you do nothing." Anyway, this story kind of stuck in my head for a long time that, it's okay to be scared, but being scared doesn't mean you do nothing. And I let it go. This is like I had forgotten this story actually. It's buried deep in my recesses till I started this book, which is called How to Be Bold: The Science of Everyday Courage. And only when you start writing a book, the publisher tells you, "Now, why are you writing this book? There
Yeah,
must be some personal." And I'm thinking back and I'm like, oh my God, that was when I really first encountered courage close up.
I mean, I feel like one wild story. Two, hopefully we can all experience courage without having a gun pointed at us and having to
Yes.
decide what we're going to do in that fearful moment. So, wait, wow, your mother was a badass. I would not have messed with her either.
Yeah.
I'm curious too. In your book, you argue that courage isn't fearlessness, which is obviously what you're getting to, but the ability to act despite fear. Why do you think that distinction is so important, and maybe why people get it so mixed up?
Well, there's several things to understand. First of all, I came to realize courage is a choice. It's not an innate trait, right? And the first step towards courage is to become acquainted with the discomfort we feel when we experience fear, right? Our bodies and minds are yelling, run or hide. But what if instead we made a conscious choice to lean into the fear, stay with it for a moment, understand it, and move forward through it? That was kind of the thought that was in my head. Now, the problem is that when we look at Hollywood movies and fiction writing, they have this idea to portray these fearless people, James Bond and Clint Eastwood, Jason Bourne, they kind of just like go through it. And it's interesting. Tom Cruise, one of them, Mission Impossible. People say, he does many of his own stunts. And he was asked, like, why do you do it and aren't you scared? And he said, it's not that I'm not afraid. I'm okay with being afraid. So, how do you become comfortable with the discomfort that fear brings? Today we have, and the reason why this is important is we are right now in the latest Harvard Business Review, they said we are in an uncertainty crisis. And people, when they feel discomfort and fear, they numb themselves. Binge gaming, binge watching movies, overworking. We kind of try to, it's uncomfortable. And yet courage is getting comfortable with this idea of fear. And that's why I came to realize that courage is action in the face of fear. In fact, I define courage as taking bold, even risky action to serve a purpose that you may see as worthy, usually in the face of abiding fear.
Hmm.
So it's okay being afraid.
I really relate to your comment about uncertainty. And I know you describe fear as a result of uncertainty plus loss of control, which I think everyone is like, that is the worst combo. Get it away. And yeah, maybe we do numb ourselves with TV shows and extra work. Can you break down this fear equation and maybe how it shows up in our careers? Because especially right now, I do feel like there's a lot of uncertainty. I feel like we're constantly with the threat of like AI or losing our jobs, or I don't know, like the job market is bad. And so, and you also feel like you don't have a lot of control over that, especially when you are, one of 10,000 people in a workplace or something like that.
Yeah. So, it's interesting, the word uncertainty. In fact, in a recent study, 76% of CEOs in their earnings calls are talking about uncertainty multiple times. And it's important to go back to a very famous economist who made a distinction between risk and uncertainty. You see, the difference is risk is where you kind of understand what the outcomes are, right? It's something you can grapple with. We have tools to assess risk, quantify risk, even mitigate it, scenario planning around it. Uncertainty is like a thick fog. No clear odds, no foolproof strategy, and that is what activates fear. It's unknown. We have technological uncertainty, we have regulatory uncertainty, we have geopolitical uncertainty, we have health uncertainty. And here's the thing with the human brain: when we encounter uncertainty, and this is hardwired in the primitive brain, we experience a primal survival human emotion of fear. Now, when we experience fear, the normal human response is fight, flight, or freeze. We always say fight or flight. Fight is the last option. I mean, I look at myself. In that situation, I didn't think of running away. Okay, maybe I was going to go and get the guard, uh, but I was frozen, right? And that's a kind of a hardwired human impulse. Our brains, sadly, are wired for cowardice,
Yeah.
particularly when we face uncertainty. Our ancestors, the brave ones who ran towards danger, they didn't make it. Right? So, you have to realize that we are in some ways the descendants of cowards. And into this, we have to kind of say, I need to kind of calm myself. I need to tame this fear. I need to embrace it and do something with it. So that is what courage is. And courage, as I said earlier, I thought courage is an innate quality. I was in awe of my mother, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know who she is. This is kind of maybe this is a temperament or a character trait. And what I've come to realize, it is actually learned behavior for many. Some people are like that; they're congenitally born that way. But you can train yourself to become bold. And if that's true, then you can ask the question: what if courage isn't something rare, but a skill we can all build? That was the unlock in my mind as I got into this. And as I dug into it, looking at the research in social, natural sciences, humanities, you discover that, even the most fearful among us can develop a capacity for bold behavior with a specific set of ways of thinking that not either neutralize or moderate the fear, or at least give us a chance to take action even in spite of fear.
Well, this is good news that it's a learned skill and not just something people are born with and you either have it or you don't. So I feel like this is good news. I know you're going to tell us that we can't necessarily get rid of the uncertainty, but I also feel like listening to this makes me say, yes, I've been in this situation before. I kind of think of it as like analysis paralysis to your point. When I'm super unsure, it's almost like I can't make a move, I freeze. Um, and it sounds like the solution to this is not to freeze, but instead to take action. Can you give us some of and I know in your book you outline the 9 C's of courage from confidence to connection to calm. Can you share maybe what these mean and how they're relevant for someone who's maybe navigating specifically some career fear?
Mhm.
And it could be everything from speaking up to a meeting to like the fear that your company might do layoffs and what are you going to do?
Yeah. So I call it kind of how do you resource yourself in the midst of this uncertainty and fear, right? How do you resource yourself? So to understand that, you have to understand how do we human behavior, what triggers and activates our behavior in uncertainty and otherwise. One school of thought is we are a cost benefit analysis machine. It's all about risk management. You kind
Yeah.
of do the pros and cons and you do the
Yep.
calculation, the math, and you kind of like, then, the outcome is clear and then you take action. Well, in uncertainty, there are limits to how much analysis you can do to get to a right answer. So I was doing that. Can I jump the guy? Can I get to him? If I should I wait till he puts his hand on the gun? How long will it take him to take the gun out? Sometimes you can. Sometimes you do cost benefit analysis. That was an extreme situation, so maybe that's not a good analogy. You can't push it too far. But rational calculus doesn't explain all our actions. So some of our actions are what we call interpretive. We ascribe meaning to situations, and then we ascribe meaning to ourselves. And that meaning making is what drives our actions. So, for instance, speaking up in a meeting, I have ascribed meaning in the meeting that, this is a high stakes meeting and I'm a lowly person here. I don't want to be judged. What if I say something wrong? And so I have put meaning and I've already talked myself out of saying anything and staying silent, right? If you change the meaning, you can change the meaning by changing the story you tell yourself. You can say, you know what? This is my moment to really stand out. And I don't want to be somebody who's lost in the crowd. I want to be somebody who's a leader, who is known as a leader, who has the capacity and confidence and capability to be a leader. So, just the tippy toeing into this is what is the story you're telling yourself and about the situation you're in? And that story, that inner narrative, is sometimes one of the biggest barriers that we face. So, the starting point into this courage story is what's your story about yourself and about the situation. Now let's get into how you resource your way into this. So you got to figure out first, change the story, change the outcome. The one of the C's I talk about is called comprehension. And the idea here, to your point about analysis paralysis, is it's sometimes you don't wait. You have to act your way into knowing. So instead of from endless analysis, you go to think more, replacing think more with probe more. You can't cancel uncertainty, but you can outlearn it. You have to act your way into clarity. I'm going to take a small step in. The original research on this was done on firefighters who go into a building. They have no idea how big the fire is. They don't have any combustible materials. They're trying to see are there any people to be saved. Maybe they can't hear them. So you got to kind of take small steps in and you're looking around for cues. So similarly, you do small pilots. You take it, experiment. You say, I'm going to speak up in a low stakes meeting. I want to build my confidence. I know I can do it. I'm going to ask somebody in the meeting to give me feedback. I'm going to take that feedback and say, now, did I do it right? What can I do better? So you build a practice loop where you're preparing, you're placing small bets, you're learning fast, then you're placing the next bet. So you're acting your way into knowing in small steps, the way a firefighter goes into a building, slowly, step by step by step. Right now, I in the book I give examples that are more extreme. Right, I give an example of a plant in Fukushima where there was a meltdown and they had no gauges working, and how they went out into the water to figure out what is going on and then come back in and then get more information. But I think on a day-to-day basis, so that's just one of those C's, and I can build out some more if you like. But
Yeah.
that's the starting point to say, look, this is something you resource yourself. You got to think about it differently.
Yeah. I mean, I think your advice about the story you tell yourself too is really big. I also have noticed like especially with careers that people want to think really hard and it's like clarity does not come from thought, it comes from action and the small things do add up to your point with the comprehension and your other C's that you have in your book, from confidence to connection to calm. Before maybe we can come back to them if we have time, because I do want to talk about some of the mental strategies for managing fear in the moment, because
Hmm.
everyone has had those moments where it's like, okay, my stomach is doing this thing, like I recognize this is like I'm actually feeling this in this exact second. So you mentioned rituals, selective attention, and reframing. Can you walk us through how these actually work in practice? I think maybe reframing you might have just chatted about, but maybe the rituals and selective attention.
So one of the C's is called calming. And the example I use is Simone Biles, who, if those who remember in the Tokyo Olympics, here's the number one gymnast on the team, and she withdraws. She gets what in gymnastics is called the twisties, and she just can't do it. And she's getting panic attacks. These are very difficult maneuvers, and she loses her confidence that she can do it, and then it unravels very quickly for her. So you look at how do people calm themselves, and I found I used to play a lot of sports in college and high school, so I love athletics and sports, and I find that it's interesting how athletes calm themselves down, right? And that's why Simone was a great example for me, but she's not the only one. I can give you others as well. Um, so what does she do? By the way, there's a body of research on what is called emotional regulation. How do we calm ourselves down? Right? So rituals, it turns out, is actually one of the most powerful ways in which people do this. You will see famous singers. I think Adele, before she goes on stage, has this ritual she does before she goes on stage. She has a photograph of her favorite singer and she looks at that picture and touches it. You have commandos. I talked to Ukrainian commandos in frontline. Before they go into the battlefield, they do a prayer in the morning and they walk around their tank, clockwise direction. So, you have that. But you have tennis players who do rituals like playing with the strings. There is no, you see them always pulling the strings about. There's no functional benefit of that. It's a ritual you do. So you ritualize. What rituals do is create a sense of normality for you. It tunes you into a sense of normal. So you're creating a normality through ritualizing things. And I think it's important to understand how calming rituals can be. And different. Some people have physical rituals, like I just gave you. Others just do it in their head.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Katie Ledecky, recent at a Stanford graduation speech, said that when she gets nervous before an event, she starts reciting and recounting her grandmother's name and just keeps repeating her grandmother's name. And here you have somebody who's probably the all-time best ever woman swimmer. Scotty Scheffler, who is the number one golfer, recently was asked what made him the best, and he said it was a round of golf he played with Tiger Woods, and they were teamed together, I think in 2022 or something like that, at the Masters. And at the 10th or 12th hole, it's a par three hole. Tiger dropped two balls into the water and got a score of 10 on a par three. That's not something even a bad golfer like me does, right? And he was out of the tournament. I mean, it was done. It's that kind of one hole knocked him out. And Scotty's watching him, and Tiger does a little reset, and for the next 5 holes, he birdies the next 5 holes. He completely tunes it out. So that leads to selective attention. I'm going to be in the here and now. I'm going to not tune myself into that. I need to be focused on this.
Hmm.
So you're really working with your mind to say, hey, I want to focus on this and not on that. And if you look at what Simone did, she did this over a period of time. She started to create practice routine. She was going to go to gymnastics practice a certain time of day for a certain amount of time. She was not going to think about the Tokyo Olympics. She was not going to pay attention to social media and what they were saying about her. She was just going to be in this particular moment and not tune everything else out. So selective attention. She was not going to focus on her failures. And then reframing. I'm in this moment. And how do you frame that as this is my moment?
Right.
This is my moment. And that took her a while for her to get there. And then she realized, she said, I need to tell myself, this is my moment to show myself that I can still be great again.
Hmm.
Right. So, how do you kind of create that mental capacity? But, the problem is strong emotions like fear consume us. And to do all this stuff, you got to be able to step away, identify it, call it out. I'm scared. Step back and ask yourself, why am I scared? Right? Understand that, right? Try to change the narrative for yourself. Ritualize to stay calm. Say, what am I going to do? Not focus on necessarily on that. And then say, how do I frame this as my moment?
Hmm.
And some people do it instinctively. It's just second nature to them. Others, they do it more deliberately. But it's very important to understand that in the heat of the moment, fear can completely paralyze us unless we find a way to tame it in
Right.
some way.
So if somebody's listening to this and they recognize this is something they want to work on or get better with, and maybe it doesn't come natural to them, but as you said, this is a skill that can absolutely be learned. Where do you think they should start? I would imagine that doing the nine C's all at once is overwhelming. What would you say to somebody who maybe has a big decision to make this week or is feeling fearful this week and they want to start inching their way toward more of this behavior and kind of having it become more second nature?
I'll start with one and then I'll throw in a second, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the first one that I would do if I was in their shoes is what I call connection. Courage is not a solo sport, it takes a village, and you need to curate the right kind of support. You don't just need cheerleaders, you need more than that. And I'll tell you what I've discovered is, so I discovered that there are 4 kinds of support people look for when they're trying to build courage in themselves. The first one is what people call emotional or moral support. People who believe in you. When people believe in you, you start to believe in yourself, right? So that's moral support. The second one is informational support. People who will give you information, they have your back. And if you need information, they're there for you. The third one is resource support. They can give you not just financial resources, but other kind of access to people, access to connections, access to whatever, their resource support. And the final one is what is called appraisal support. They're going to give you feedback, whether you like to hear it or not. And that will also kind of carry you through. So reminding you the 4. So it's not just I have friends who can help me. It's like I need people who give me emotional moral support. I have information, I have resource, and I have appraisal support. If you're an entrepreneur, by the way, or a venture capitalist, that's what great venture capitalists do. They not only give you money, they give you emotional support, they give you information, they give you feedback. And I think it becomes important to understand, how do we tap into that? Once you understand that, then I get to another C, which is confidence. And that's a cliche. Really, Ranjay, do I have to listen to about confidence lecture from you? It's not just confidence, It is confidence is domain specific skills. I know the task, I got it. I'm a good writer or I'm a good speaker. I can do this. I'm a good accountant, a CPA. I know my job, I know my task. Beneath it is a meta skill, what you might call a can-do attitude. I don't care what comes my way. I got it. Not only do I know my job, I also know that I can improvise, I can adjust, I can tap in, I can find my friends, I have my contacts. No matter what comes my way, I got it.
Mhm.
That inner confidence is really the root. What a Stanford psychologist, Albert Bandura, called self-efficacy. That's the meta skill. So if you start with get the connection and get that your inner support squad, build up that confidence.
Hmm. I love that. And I also feel like you were talking about like that's what makes a really good venture capitalist. I feel like that's also what makes a really good manager. Like a manager
Mhm.
should be able to give you some emotional support, but some information, but they should also be able to give you feedback. So hopefully we're working that into management training as well. Ranjay, I have loved this conversation. And I also feel like it's made me less intimidated about the topic of fear and courage because I feel like sometimes these topics are a little abstract and I get a little lost in sort of the weeds of like, okay, these are like feelings, but how do we practically put these practices into place? And I feel like you've been very practical as well. So I really appreciate that.
Not at all. I'll
So
leave you with
tell,
one final insight. Can I leave you with one
yeah,
final
yeah,
insight?
absolutely.
So, in his foreword to my book, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, courage is ultimately an inner journey. Yes, behaving with courage can allow us to have impact and shape the world in profound ways, our careers, but ultimately, courage is a choice we make. It's something we choose to embrace as a central pillar in our lives. And I think when you find that, it allows us to live more complete lives. If you look at the research on regret, people have much greater regret about inaction than action
Yeah,
that they've taken. And I think so. And I think we internalize we aren't born courageous. It's a choice we make.
yeah, absolutely. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm going to make sure we link to your book, How to Be Bold, The Surprising Science of Everyday Courage, in the show notes. Where else can people follow your work? And we can put those links in the show notes as well.
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. That's
Amazing.
where the platform on which I'm most active. And if they want to see more videos, I have a YouTube channel where I've put a bunch of videos. There's a LinkedIn newsletter as well, where I've basically taken snippets from my book and written it again, not just copy and paste. So there's a string of newsletters that lay out the fundamental principles in one bite-sized chunk at a time.
Amazing.
So,
This is a very LinkedIn loving audience, so you will get some invites for sure. I'll put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so
okay.
much.
Pleasure. Thank you, Lauren.